Welcome everybody to another session of Industrial Logic's Twitter Spaces. We do this every Friday at 2 p.m. Central. If you would like to join or you would like to come on this Twitter space and discuss a topic that you like, please reach out to me and we'll definitely schedule that. Today we are joined with Esther Derby. She is somebody who I respect a lot. She has 4 decades of experience leading, observing, and living through organizational change. She started out as a agile software programmer, but then quickly realized that her real work involved changing the way people work and supporting them through that process. Since then, she has helped a broad array of clients from startups to Fortune 500 companies, and she is also a author, co-author of books like Behind Closed Doors: Secrets of Great Management. She also co-authored Agile Retrospectives, which is one of the favorite books of mine. And she also recently wrote the topic that we have today, Seven Rules for Positive Productive Change with Esther Derby. So we're gonna talk to her about something she refers in her book called that she calls change by attraction as opposed to change by degree. So hopefully, Esther, I gave an honest and true introduction to yourself. But if you'd like to say a few words around your background, please go ahead.
Well, that was a very nice introduction. Thank you. Um, so, uh, as Manoob said, I started as a programmer, and I've done a lot of things around software for most of my career. I don't write code anymore. Um, um, but I still know how to ask intelligent questions about what's going on with the way people are working together when they write code. So I primarily work with um, helping organizations be more effective and more humane, because that's really what I care most about, is making work more humane. And I work with a lot of managers to help them be better managers.
Awesome, awesome. So I know I was fortunate enough to be in a workshop ran by you, Esther, and
Yeah.
I learned a lot about change by attraction. I learned about importance of observation, listening. You talked about coaching, consulting, and how that role fits into the modern work environment. Um, why don't you tell us a little bit about this term change by attraction and what it means to you?
Yeah. Well, I have seen so many change efforts where, change is pushed on people and people are pushed to change. I mean, if you look at a lot of the traditional change management sort of methodologies, they often include a plan for overcoming resistance. Uh, and what I have observed is that the resistance actually comes from the pushing. And if people weren't didn't feel so pushed, they would not respond that way, right? Because it really clicks into people's need for autonomy, and when they feel like that is threatened, they tend to react, right? Because anytime somebody tells you what to do, it's a hit against your autonomy. So I find it useful to think more about how do you nurture change and how do you attract people to the change you want to see. And there are tons of ways to do that, right? So that people become interested in what you're doing, and then they become part of it. They're no longer, people who have to be pushed or prodded to do whatever it is you're telling them to do.
Great. So before we move forward, I would like to thank everybody who has joined the space so far. I would request you to go to your right bottom corner of your screen. There is a comment icon. Go click on that. It will take you to a tweet Please like and retweet it so we can reach out to more and more people. Um, I would like to welcome my co-host Patrice. Thank you for joining. She is a colleague coach at Industrial Logic as well, and we have some distinguished speakers on the panel as well. So feel free to chime in anytime you want. We want this to be more interactive. People who are in the audience, you guys, we would love to hear from you guys. So please feel free to request the mic. There's a microphone icon on the bottom left corner of your screen. If you're joining through your desktop or some other means, please try to join through the Twitter mobile app because that way you can join the speaker panel and talk to us as well. With that, I would like to also welcome Tim Oettinger. He is also my co-host for today, John Reed, Pizarro, and the rest of the gang at Industrial Logic. Um, Jay, why don't you go ahead and move the conversation forward?
Hey, Manu, thanks. Hey, everyone. Sorry, I was a little bit late joining. Meetings running over today, but Esther, I wanted to ask more about the last point you made about about nurturing people or encouraging them towards change. How do you gauge the environment to determine what methods to use as far as attracting people to want to change?
Well, I think one of the first things I do is I start small. So in my experience, a lot of the change efforts try to hit everybody at the same time, and there's a number of problems with that. But I try to start with something small, like a small pilot or just a small group of people, ideally who have signed up to want to try something new. So I have done situations where I've actually let it be known in the organization that we want to try this new thing and then see who shows up to want to try it, or to form a team that's specifically around trying to do something um, in a particular way, trying to a team that's going to try to learn to do really rigorous XP or something like that. And what that does is, one, you have people who are actually interested in trying to make it work. So there's a different level of investment. If it does work, then you have kind of taken the whole idea of, well, that will never work here off the table. And if it doesn't work, that's also super useful information about what the obstacles are and what the other work you need to do to get ready for this kind of change is.
I I like that approach. From I guess from a pragmatist perspective, when a lot of times when either consultants or coaches are brought in, it's because the organization, like at a high level, has a goal or something that they're trying to accomplish. Like it'd be nice if they just wanted better outcomes that don't necessarily result in business outcomes. However, I think we all know that that's not often the case. So how do you sell that to a manager or to an executive that's saying, "Hey, I want you to come in and facilitate change in my organization"? um, how do you sell that? Hey, we're going to start small and maybe get to the larger change that you're hoping to see, but still very much paying for in the interim.
Um, Well, I talk about the benefits of doing something in an iterative and incremental fashion. And I talk about what the risks are of trying to make a huge change when the company isn't ready for it. I mean, that causes a huge amount of churn. So if they really are interested in business results, which it's totally reasonable to be interested in that, then the language of risk and benefit is often something that they can relate to.
Do you have a story or an example of a time when that was the conversation that was had between you and the client and things turned out for the better?
Well, I have examples, and there's some things I can't say too much about. But I think it's often most effective to, work with a few groups, and, if you can succeed with them, then people get interested in it. I mean, I had a multinational client a couple years ago that's what we did. We just worked pretty intensively with a couple of teams, and, um, it soon became clear that they were getting better results, and that made it easier for other teams to want to try.
Awesome. So, Esther, one of the rules that you talk about in your book, Seven Rules for Positive Productive Change. By the way, anybody who's interested in finding out more about Esther, go to estherderby.com. You'll find her workshops, her podcasts, her classes that she takes, and the books that she has written. All that information you can find there. One of the rules that you talk about, Esther, is strive for congruence. Why do you think congruence is such a foundational part of bringing about productive, positive change?
So let me say a little bit about how I think about congruence. I think about congruence as a state that we strive for. It's not something you get there and you stay there forever, but you always strive for it, where you're able to take into account your own capabilities, your own needs, your own stuff, and those of the people you're working with, and the greater context. So that, includes yourself, it includes the other person, and then the whole business context that you're working in. And I find that's important because, one, when you can be in that sort of balance, you can think more creatively and you can connect more effectively, and you are able to access your empathy. And I think all of those are important in a change situation.
That's
All right.
fascinating. I was going to ask you what you meant by congruence, but you just answered that for me. And because I was thinking that it was going to be about um, alignment, and I was like, what is the difference between what I see as alignment, which is, we agree on goals and have some agreement about how we're going to get there, but this is different, what you're describing, especially taking stock of yourself.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that.
Well, I for to start, I think you are more likely to reach alignment with other people when you can approach the conversation from a place of congruence. Right. So I think it is it's super helpful in having those conversations. Um, and now I've forgotten what the gist of your question was because I got on that
um,
part.
uh, Taking stock of yourself,
Yeah.
like yeah.
Yeah. So if I come into a situation with this idea that I, know how things should be done, um, and I approach the people I'm going to be working with in that way, I am more likely to engender reactance from them, right? Because I'm coming into it without taking into account, what their challenges are, what their problems are, what they're struggling with. I may not take into account, you know, that this is the fifth attempt at an agile transformation they've been through in the last 7 years, all of which are going to affect the way people are able to respond to me and the way they're going to respond to a change, whether they're going to be able to absorb a change, whether they're deeply cynical at this point. So by being clear about what I'm coming in with, if I'm coming in with a bunch of judgments, or I'm coming in with fear, or whatever else, it's going to impact the way I am able to relate to people. So I think just being clear on my own needs and my own motivations and making some adjustments to them. If I notice that I'm feeling really judgy about the way this company is doing business or whatever, um, enables me to connect more effectively. Did I manage to answer your question the second time?
I think so. I find it fascinating because I have no training in therapy, but it sounds from a lay point of view, it sounds a little bit like therapy, where people are coming in, uh, maybe a party. For example, the example you gave, where if you're coming in, but this is the seventh time or whatever, and people are resentful even of your presence, and you don't know why, because you haven't unearthed that yet, then taking that personally, like as an affront to myself and
Sure.
my expertise, right, is would not be helpful. Whereas to instead to approach it with humility and curiosity and gently excavating.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that, humility and curiosity and gently excavating. I do want to say that I don't do therapy. I'm not qualified to do therapy. I'm not trained as a therapist. And that said, the model of congruence does come out of Virginia Satir's work. And what I have discovered is that there's a lot of her models are useful for working with humans who are, well within the range of adjustment, that they're useful models for dealing with other humans.
Hey Esther, how you doing? This is Tim.
Hey, Tim. Hey, you're going through a big change.
Yes, I am.
Well, I
Yes.
wonder how it would feel if somebody told you had to move to a different country.
Then the one I'm going to?
Yeah, versus saying, "Oh wow, I love this place, and my life here is so many benefits to my life. I want to go."
Yeah, it's definitely a move by attraction. I think
Yes,
that's
indeed.
a fair call. I wanted to give you a quote. I found this. Some person said this, and I'd like your reaction. They said, "Learning to observe includes learning what you tend not to see." And of course, it was you.
Oh yeah.
Can you open that up a little bit?
Yeah. Well, we all have biases in I mean, we have biases that are just innate to being human, right? But we have biases in what we tend to pick up on because of our backgrounds, because of our interests, for any number of reasons. And figuring out what you often don't notice enables you to focus on that and um, become more aware of what's going on around you. Like, for example, um, I've worked with people who um, just they because they had focused so intensely on technical concerns for most of their lives, they weren't often aware of what was going on with the people in the room. Like someone could start crying and they wouldn't notice it, they'd just keep going. So, I mean, that's a very extreme example, but in that case, becoming aware of the fact that, oh yeah, there's, the information that we get from how people are responding is useful to and essential to achieving what we hope to achieve. It can be a pretty significant insight.
It's an interesting idea that it's sort of the opposite of recency illusion, right? I mean, you notice something and then you see it everywhere, and it's like you're the opposite of that. You don't see something, and even though it's surrounding you on all sides, you're just completely unaware. Is is there a way to get past that other than using other people as additional sensory organs?
Um, well, there are all sorts of exercises you can do about observation. Um, I bought a book about it and then didn't manage to actually look at it, but it happens to me with books a lot. But yeah, the premise of the book was you would just practice a little bit each day, and they would give you a cue on what to notice, and you'd practice noticing that thing. And sometimes it was stuff you were used to looking at, and sometimes it wasn't. I know when I took some writing workshops with Jerry Weinberg a few years ago, actually quite a while ago by now. And that's one of the exercises we did in the writing workshop was like, okay, today at lunch, we're going to notice cars that have dents in them. And it was often something that didn't seem like directly relevant to what we were writing about, but the practice of just being very conscious about observing things was super useful in becoming more aware of details, um, uh, becoming aware of the range of things that you could observe. All sorts of useful things come out of it. And then, you can choose not to observe things. Like I tend not to observe um, stuff that to me seems irrelevant to what's going on. Like this, what's the material of the ceiling?
Unless you're in a really cool pub and it's all that
Oh, well,
tin.
if it's that beautiful work tin, then I'll pay attention to it.
Oh yeah. Thanks, Esther. I thought that would be that starts to bring a practical edge pretty quick so people can see, where you are.
Yeah. So I think observation isn't perfect because it's mitigated through our senses and our biases, but the alternative is to take action, without any basis in what's going on. I mean, I don't know. Did you ever play pin the tail on the donkey when you were a kid?
Yes, I did.
I hate that game. I just hate it. But when I was a kid, it was actual pins. It wasn't Velcro like it is now, but it was
Mhm.
actual
Oh
pins.
no, actual pins.
Yeah,
Actual
that's how we did
pins.
it.
And
Old school.
yeah, old school. And the whoever was it was always the party mother. It was, it's never the
Mhm.
party mother. It was always the party mother. Um, would take the poor kid who was supposed to be pinning the tail, and you were blindfolded, and then she'd spin you around so you were dizzy. And then you're supposed to get this pin in the right place on the donkey. When you're blindfolded and dizzy, and to me, if you can't, if you don't train yourself to observe what's going on with the people around you and see the patterns and notice things about the process, you're kind of like that blindfolded dizzy kid, kind of randomly trying to stick the tail in the right place.
I love that calls out this awakening your curiosity and exercising your curiosity the way you exercise the rest of your systems. And
Yeah.
I think it's important because I find if I have room for either curiosity or self-certainty, and I have trouble maintaining both at the same time, which suggests I should lean toward curiosity most of the time.
Well, you can always check in about the certainty part. Um, I think the another way that plays out sometimes is that um, that it flips between curiosity and blame. And sadly enough, I hear this fairly often when people are talking about agile. It's like, oh well, they're just doing it all wrong, or oh, they just their technical skills are crap, or whatever it is. So flipping into that blame rather than getting curious about, wow, these are people who have been working here for 5 years. I wonder what's going on in this organization that their skills are where they are. Or I wonder what their backgrounds are. So I think that sometimes it's between self-certainty, and sometimes it's and curiosity, and sometimes it's between blame and curiosity. Yeah, and even if I'm certain about what should be done, it's sort of irrelevant, because what is going to lead to success is doing something that uh, the other people involved think should be done. And I may be able to influence that, but I can't dictate it.
Okay, before we move forward, there's a tweet that I posted on top of the space. You should see it over my head. Please go to this tweet, like and retweet it so we can reach out to more and more people. And if you have a question, please feel free to request the mic. There's a microphone icon on the left bottom corner of your screen. If you're joining from a desktop, you won't be able to join the speaker, so I would recommend joining through the Twitter mobile app that allows you to request the mic. If you can't join the speaker and still want to add a comment or ask a question, go to the tweet on top of my head and comment underneath it, and we will make sure to include your questions or comments in our session today. Back to you, Patrice.
Esther, your last comment about essentially facilitators of change coming to very like critical conclusions about the teams of the organizations that we're working with, it made me think about the last statement you made about our own fears and our own biases that we come into an engagement with. How can we as facilitators of change start to identify for ourselves when we are operating out of curiosity versus operating out of fear?
Well, I think part of it is you listen to your own internal dialogue. Part of it is that you notice how you feel, because blame and certainty feel different than curiosity. When you catch yourself, you know, with your own internal dialogue saying, "Oh man, I can't believe that. I can't believe this people." Then you've tipped out of curiosity.
This was definitely true for me, as still very young in my coaching career, where in an engagement I was getting just frustrated, like why don't they see this, and what is wrong with these people? But thankfully, I had Matthew Carlson,
Mm.
and I went to him with my frustrations, and he said, "Well, here's what Esther says." That first you should center yourself. I'm like, oh, guilty.
Matthew has all the research behind all the stuff I say, which I think is kind of,
What a great team.
Absolutely.
yeah. You're lucky to work with Matthew, and he's lucky to work with you.
Oh.
Esther, this is Perry Reed, also with
Hi.
Industrial Logic. Hi. Going back to the change by attraction comments that you made earlier, um, several things you said really resonated with me. When you're dealing with a large organization that may have a lot of things that need to change, you recommended starting small
Yep.
and using a pilot, to implement a change that you want to make. But the next thing you said I thought was really important. That's, gather volunteers who want to participate, and this is that attraction part of the change by attraction. You want people to be attracted to the thing you're trying to change. Um, we've tried to do that on most of the projects we do, because it works, right? I mean,
Right.
particularly like you said, if you succeed, you can point to that pilot and say, "Oh, look, this was a success," and then you can ask the questions about how do we expand it further. But I want to dig in a little bit to the idea of gathering volunteers, because I've been in coaching situations where there was a lot of resistance to change, and even though we thought we were presenting really viable and attractive different ways of working, we had a lot of skeptics and a lot of people who were not excited to participate. And what I've always found to be true, and this is what I'd like your comment on, is I felt like I needed to find a way for them to see what's in it for me, right?
Yeah.
Because it could be great for the company, and that's always good, and positive that as an employee, I want the company to succeed. But I've always seemed to find it easier to find those volunteers if I make it personal. That if we introduce this change or we change the way you work, that you personally are going to benefit for n number of reasons. And you know, I found that has helped in many cases. I'm curious what other tools you've used, if you've used that, or if you use other things to try to find it attractive to people to volunteer to be part of that pilot.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Some people just are eager to try something new. There's lots of people who just, if I can try something new, that's super attractive to them. It's not true for everybody. Um, the other truth about change that I think often gets overlooked is that while there are upsides, usually there are always downsides. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and just be clear about it. Because I mean, if you don't admit there are downsides, people will know you're lying, and that doesn't help. Um, if you think about what the downsides are ahead of time, who stands to win and who stands to lose, sometimes you can mitigate some of that. Sometimes you can have conversations with people um, ahead of time to just be clear about it. Um, because people will try to hold on to stuff that they value, um, and in doing so, their behavior may look destructive. So I make a point always of looking at what the gains and losses are, and some of them may be temporary. Like for example, if you're teaching people some new engineering skills, which I think you do at Industrial Logic quite a bit, is help people improve their engineering, their technical practices. Um, there's going to be at least a temporary loss of productivity, and because people are learning something new. So that happens on the on the company level, but on the individual level, people are going to feel less competent for a while, because they know how to do what they're doing, and now they have to do something that they're a beginner at. Oh, I'm going to be a beginner at TDD, or I'm going to be a beginner at refactoring. And for a lot of people, that is, kind of an ego and a status hit, right? Particularly if they were like the senior person on the team, and now suddenly they're going to be just as inept at something as everybody else for a while. Um, so I try to think through what those are, and that helps me understand how people might respond. It helps me understand what I might be able to mitigate. It helps me have conversations with people. Um, I think that one of the toughest ones, the whole learning curve thing is in some ways a pretty easy one to manage. But I heard a woman talking about a change. And I think this is actually the stories in the book, but she was talking about um, she worked for a big hospital organization, and they wanted to uh, reduce costs, improve patient care, all those great things. And they were doing it by eliminating a lot of the nurse manager positions. And she just couldn't understand why people didn't get beyond this, couldn't get behind this goal of better patient care. Who could be against better patient care? Well, no one's against better patient care. But for a lot of these people, it meant um, something about their identity. They had put a lot into their education, into developing the skills to be a nurse manager, and now they were being asked to go back to the floor. So it had something to do with identity and status. Some of them just frankly didn't want to be back on the nursing floor. And from the way she talked, from the way the woman who's leading this change talked about it, it seemed like those ideas hadn't occurred to her, that it would involve that kind of loss of identity and loss of status. And so she was like, she was blaming them. Who couldn't, what's wrong with them that they don't believe in this goal. But it's really pretty predictable, and that one's a harder one to work with if people feel like I'm going to be losing status or identity.
I think one of the rules that you, sorry, Perry, you wanna continue on that?
No, I was remembering from the book, and I think I remember from that example you introduced the term um, reverent power as a way that people use their position to do influence, and sometimes people, that's something that they lose. And I liked what you were saying about being honest about a change, because there are upsides and downsides
Yep.
to things, and people may all of a sudden who have felt like they've been in a position of power may find that they're now just part of the team, and that can be hard for some people to take. So
That
thank
can
you.
be really hard. um so referent power doesn't require positional power. And I
Perry, if you could mute, please. Thank you.
I think referent power is it's based on relationships and how people feel about you. So that's available to anyone who chooses to cultivate that. Sorry, I've got a little bit of a cough here, so excuse me. Um and in terms of change, network power, referent power, expert power, which means you're respected for your expertise, um, are hugely valuable, and I think in many ways more effective than positional power. Because positional power allows you to say, you go do that. But referent power, expertise power, network power, those are all much more related to attraction. Which
That's
in some ways
amazing.
takes us back to, working on a pilot with people who want to try it. If they are people who are respected in the organization, or are well liked, or they have good networks, you have just done yourself a huge favor in terms of people's willingness to accept a change. Because if those people are trusted, then um, other people are going to take their word for it.
Absolutely. I see, Fazaro, you wanna add something here?
Yeah. Well, on that last point, you said if they are respected.
Mm-hmm.
I was curious if you've ever found yourself in a situation where the people who signed up for the change were less respected in the organization, and so that wasn't effective.
I have not personally had that experience. Um, sorry. Um, but what I have seen happen is that if someone who is not respected says, I think it's a stupid idea, then that can have the opposite effect, kind of reverse psychology. Well, if he thinks it's stupid, it must be good.
Yeah. Well, and I also wonder, how the sort of person who raises their hand, who volunteers, who has that courage to say, I want to try the new thing, or I'm enthusiastic about this, seems like there would be kind of a correlation. Maybe this is my bias, but there would be a correlation to that person also having respect in the organization.
It could be.
But it depends on their culture, I suppose.
Well, and it depends on their personality to some extent.
True.
You know, if it's someone who's like, well, I'm out trying the new thing, and well, you're just, you know, you're stuck in the dark ages, then that's not going to be helpful.
Yeah, I suppose posture matters a lot in that.
This is about Esther, and I don't want to make it about me, but I've had a similar experience where we had a class and the senior person took all of his people and left in the first hour of the week, saying, there's nothing for me to learn here, which was frustrating.
Oh, my.
But the people who stayed all developed a set of skills. And when I came back a month later, the people who stayed through the class were the ones that the people who left had to turn to for help in problem solving. And I thought, well, there's a classic case. How often do you get to have a control group? Right?
That's fascinating.
But they became, because they ended up having the skills that they actually needed. And that's nothing to do with me. That was, them making a choice. But it made them eventually become the ones that were the respected ones. It raised them up, which was kind of a cool thing to happen. I've not replicated it. It only happened once. That's the story.
It's a great story. I wonder how the person who packed up his crew and left processed all that.
That's a good question. We should ask Matthew again when we talk to him. He knows the fellow.
Oh,
I thought you were calling Matthew out as the senior.
Yeah, no, I would never. But even if I did, that would be hilarious. But yeah, he knows and probably could tell us.
I think we need to bring Matthew and Esther both together on a space sometime in the future. I think that'll be really cool.
that would be
So
fun.
I want to include a comment from Nick Barton. He says the problem with positional power is that the outcome of decisions are all on you. Influence is much better. Decisions can be taken collectively with collective responsibility. Now everyone wants to make it work. I've been in both positions, by the way. Thank you for that comment. We also have a. Mhm. You want to say something to that?
No, I was just agreeing.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and there's a question as well from Jimmy E. He's saying, what is your most recent learning discovery in consulting that has changed your approach in helping transformation?
What is the most recent thing I've learned? Well, I learn stuff every day. But I think the thing that really sticks with me is some conversations I had with Matthew Carlson about institutional theory, which it just says, the people who are adopting. I mean, I'm paraphrasing quite a bit here, but the people who are doing agile transformations now have very different motivations and very different risk tolerance than the people who were doing agile transformations 15 years ago or even 10 years ago. And so we need to approach them in a very different way. And that conversation kind of put words and theory behind some things I had observed. So hit up Matthew Carlson to tell you about institutional theory.
I'm actually hitting him up right now on Slack to see if he can join for a few minutes. Since his name came up so many times. But one of the things, good.
Is that a go ahead, Tim, or is that a go ahead, someone else?
No, Tim, you.
Okay. I thought we could have all jumped in there. Esther, have you had a chance to list your 7 rules in this talk?
No.
Oh, would you like them?
Well, let's see if my memory will work. So,
So one of the ones that I was going to mention, sorry, was honor the past, present, and the people.
yeah,
Because when I was in the workshop with you, you talked a lot about acknowledgement.
yeah.
So yeah, why don't you talk about that?
Well, so it's connected to congruence, which is saying, you have to honor where people have come from and where they are, and what is working in the current situation, because there's always something that's working in the current situation. Um, because coming in and telling people, you've been living in darkness, um, it doesn't help, right? People will hold on to what they have if it's theirs, even if it's not very good, right? And you telling them it's not very good in some ways just makes them defend it more. So I think it's really important to just acknowledge and honor what has come before. It's how people got to where they are. It's how they got to the moment of someone realizing that maybe we need to make some changes. It's just basic respect for other humans.
Absolutely. I see Matthew Carlson in the audience. Matthew is here, everybody. So, Matthew, are you having an issue requesting the mic? You have to join through your mobile app in order to join the mic, the speaker panel. And I'm inviting you to speak, so
Yeah,
you should
Matthew
be
is in.
able to. Sorry, what was that, Esther?
I said Matthew is in the house.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, great.
Oh,
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Your name came up quite a few times.
Were your ears burning?
A little bit, yeah. I've heard it's been a wonderful conversation so far.
well, so I was just asked what was the biggest thing I'd learned recently, and I said it was the most striking one was the conversations you and I had about institutional theory.
Well, thank you very much for that. I know that
Right.
for me, learning from you, I mean, your 7 rules for positive, productive change and just all of the different stuff around problem solving leadership. Uh, I feel like all I've been able to do is point you toward a little bit
It
of.
looks like Happy may need a minute to join the speaker panel. I wanted to ask,
No, he's actually
Huh?
speaking. He's
is he?
speaking actually. Yeah. I think you're having some connection issue. So I'll drop you and bring you back.
Thanks, Manib.
No problem. Continue, Matthew.
Oh yeah, I feel like all I've really been able to do is point out some academic research that really backs up everything that you've been saying for years.
Which I just love. I just love finding out there's research to back up what I say. Um, One of the funny things that bits of research I found was I've been saying for years that in meetings and retrospectives, if you want people to participate fully, it's really useful to get everybody's voice in the room right at the beginning, even if they only say one or two words. And it turns out there's research about that. Made me really happy. So,
So what were some of the questions that came up that we could refer towards, Matthew? Yeah, go ahead, Harry.
I'm sorry, real quick. So, Esther, you were talking about what effectively is rule number 2 about honoring the past, the present, and the people. And I wanted to comment on that because as technical coaches, when we engage with a team in another company, we look at the code somewhat objectively because we didn't write it, first of all, and secondly, we're there to help improve it. And there's almost always lots of reasons why this is examples of bad code, right?
mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I have to remind myself whenever I'm in that situation is that people are often doing the best they can with what they know how
Yep.
to do. And then secondly, you realize that a lot of times these are highly successful companies, and this bad code is, is running this $2.5 billion company, right? So it isn't all bad, But if you don't honor that, if you come up from a point of view of, well, this is horrible, this is the worst code I've ever seen, then you immediately put yourself in an oppositional
Right.
position.
So that's where curiosity can be helpful. It's like, I wonder what was going on for people that they wrote the code this way. And very often it's they were under incredible pressure, or they had been told, this has to go out now, or they were told, we'll go back and fix that later. So it wasn't necessarily that they were totally incompetent. There may have been a lot of pressures on them to write the code the way they did. But what's really humbling, and I must admit this has happened to me, is when you go back in and look at some code and say, this code is crap, and it turns out that you wrote it. That
That's funny.
that helps you get over a lot of judgment.
On the other hand, that's always a solid sign that you've been improving.
Well, thank you. That is true too. That is
I
true.
I had a question. Well, I wanted to hear your thoughts on the equation of like referent power
Mm.
versus positional power, like influence versus authority.
Mm-hmm.
And like there's always in my experience there's two sides to getting somebody to change stuff, and usually us nerd influencers like try to just teach people to death until like, well, as soon as they see it, they'll change their behavior, they'll change your mind. But what's always kind of hidden, and I have to remember this, is what do they think they're being rewarded for? And that to me is like, that's where you have to kind of bring in the positional power angle to it.
If the people who have power can change the rewards,
or at least change the perception of what people think they're being, because sometimes people think they're being rewarded for something that they're not being rewarded for.
yeah.
There's like a
Yeah.
But anyway, I just wanted to know what your thoughts are on balancing that equation.
Well, I think people who have power in organizations are in a position to reduce some of the friction for change by making sure that just like the example you pointed out, that the rewards that people experience are actually aligned with the change you want to see. I think that's a far more productive role for them in change than telling people and pushing people. It's just get the incentives lined up, and then it's more likely that people are going to do that thing, whatever it is. But if you keep all the old reward structures, it's counter motivating people towards the change, making it much harder. And then all you can do is push, and you're pushing people to do something that's in some cases against their interest, if it's going to affect their bonus or their promotion. Which
My aha moment just now is that what exists now is there in part because of the current reward structure.
mm-hmm. So this is a nice lead into the third rule, which is assess what is. That's what I see happen a lot, is that and this didn't start with agile. I first observed it at some point in the 80s, that people come in with this big change program, and they kind of paint it on over the existing systems in processes and reward structures and all of that kind of stuff, all of the things that are responsible for the pattern of results that you see in the organization. So they kind of paint this new thing on top of it, but eventually the old pattern reasserts itself. So I think that's actually a really strategic job for managers in change, is looking at what all those underlying influences are that hold the current pattern in place and trying to shift those. So the incentive structure, the formal and informal rewards are just two of them. There may be a lot of other ones, but so, starting to loosen those up so that something else can actually take hold is really important, because papering it over the top won't work.
There's
Sorry.
a that just bled into the assess what is. I know a lot.
Yeah.
And we keep finding people who say, "Well, I just say what it is. I just tell the truth. That's why they don't like me." And I think there's a difference between when you say assess what is versus them saying, "This is what I know." I think that there's an entirely different posture to that, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, assess what's holding the current, what's contributing to the current pattern and what's holding the pattern in place, not assessing the competence or goodness of the people involved in the situation. I was at a it was one of the early Agile conferences, actually, and I was in a session with someone who's a consultant, and he was actually kind of bragging about how he goes in and he just tells people how it is. And I was in this one company and I told them that their skills were so bad that it was a miracle they even had a job, and I made people cry. And it's like, what what is the point of doing something like that? So you make yourself feel big, because it's certainly not an effective strategy for change. So I guess he was making an assessment of what is, but not in a way that I think would actually be useful for change.
In the book, Esther, you made a recommendation about even the choice of words when you're describing the opportunity. I think I remember you saying that instead of saying we're going to try a better way to do something, you refer to it as suggesting we're going to try a different way.
Yeah.
Because better implies
Yeah.
that your old way is bad.
Yeah. That's why I found it so distressing when everyone was calling themselves an agile evangelist. Because if you think about evangelism for a moment, it is got the implication that we have the truth and you have been living in darkness. And I get the sincerity and the good intention and the enthusiasm that people bring when they bring that title, but it does really imply that I know the truth and you don't, on a metaphorical level, which gets in the way.
Okay, we have another comment from Nick Barden. He's saying most devs wants to do it right. Maybe they don't know what right looks like, but that's where the influence comes in. The resistance comes from the middle management who want everything yesterday and can't understand the hiatus may be necessary. So he's kind of blaming the middle management.
I think they get blamed a lot. And it's unfortunate, because I think they would have a hugely strategic role to play in change, because they are in a position to see across the system and work on improvements to the system, and they are in a position to provide meaningful support for teams, and they know a lot about how the organization works. They're often in an interesting position of, they understand at least something about how the day-to-day workings of things happen, and they understand at least something of the strategy of the organization. And often that's the only point where those two sets of knowledge overlap in organizations. So um, I think they can be hugely valuable. I think it's unfortunate that for some period of time, particularly in Scrum, people would just say, we don't need no middle managers. We don't need no stinking managers. It's like, well, maybe you need the people who are in that role to do something different. But again, it comes back to identity and threat. When you tell somebody, we don't need you, and suddenly Scrum is something that's going to eliminate your job, well, of course, they're not going to be particularly warm in their embrace of this way of doing things if it means the end of their job and their salary and their retirement savings and everything else.
I think we are on time. I'm gonna give one more chance to people who are on the speaker panel to say any final words, and then we're gonna say goodbye to Esther. Any takers?
Nobody wants to say goodbye to Esther. It's a joy
Yeah.
again hearing your voice and being in conversation with you. Thank
Yeah,
you for being a
always.
part.
Always. Well, thank you for inviting me. It was fun. I got the applause track. How exciting.
Perfect timing. Thank you. Thank you again, Esther, for joining and for sharing your thoughts with us. Tim, do you have something to add?
My pleasure. I'm sorry I missed the last thing you said.
No, I thought Tim had something to add. I didn't want to cut him off.
Okay.
Hey, by the way, is there any chance that the ironically named Raspberry Jam podcast will ever come back?
It might. It might come back. We haven't done an episode for quite a long time, but I've been focused on my Change by Track podcast.
Oh, I should go chase that one down then. Thank you.
Yeah, Change by Attraction podcast.
All right.
Nice.
So thank you so much, Esther, for joining today. We do these Twitter Spaces and we talk about all things agility every Friday at 2 p.m. Central. The session is being recorded, so if you want to share it with your friends, with your colleagues, feel free to do that. And let's say goodbye, and we're gonna see you next week. Happy Friday, everyone, and have a great weekend.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
For sure. It
Thank you.
was great to have you.
Great to speak with you, Dan.